It all began as a joke during a company party. It was a Friday night, and everyone was relaxed, enjoying the opportunity to have fun outside the work environment. The music played softly in the background while colleagues chatted animatedly and shared laughs. I was near the bar, having a drink, when my boss, Jack, approached. He was a charismatic man, and we started talking about various subjects, from company projects to our sports preferences. At one point, the conversation focused on football, a passion we shared. We ended up making a friendly bet on the weekend game. The idea seemed harmless, a joke between colleagues. On Sunday, I watched the game with enthusiasm, but my team lost. On Monday, Jack reminded me of the bet, and I was curious to know what he would ask of me. He suggested dinner to talk more. At first, I was surprised, but I decided to accept the invitation, seeing it as an extension of our professional friendship. On the night of the dinner, we were in a quiet restaurant and talked at length about our lives, dreams, and even our challenges at work. The conversation flowed naturally, and the night went pleasantly. From then on, our interaction at work changed slightly, but we always maintained mutual respect and professionalism. In the following days, the memories of that dinner remained in my mind, but I knew it was important to focus on work and my responsibilities. Sometimes, certain moments make us reflect on our limits and choices, but it's essential to maintain balance and keep things in perspective. However, something had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about Jack, his smile, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his passions. I felt guilty about these thoughts because I knew he was married, and I had a stable relationship with my boyfriend, Tom. I tried to ignore this feeling, convincing myself that it was just a passing attraction. I focused on my work and my relationship with Tom, trying to avoid compromising situations with Jack. But fate had other plans. A few weeks later, the company sent Jack and me to a conference in another city. We would be away for 3 days, and although I tried to change my assignment, it wasn't possible. The trip was a constant test of my willpower. During the day, we maintained a professional attitude, participating in lectures and networking with other professionals in the industry. But at night, dining together at the hotel, I felt the tension between us growing. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing and sharing anecdotes like old friends. On the last night, after a particularly enjoyable dinner, Jack invited me for a drink at the hotel bar. I knew I should refuse, but something inside me pushed me to accept. As we drank and talked, our hands accidentally brushed on the table. The contact sent an electric shock through my entire body. We looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment, I knew he felt the same. Without saying a word, Jack leaned towards me and kissed me. It was a passionate kiss, full of pent-up desire. For a moment, I let myself go, forgetting everything else. But then reality hit me like a bucket of cold water. I pulled away abruptly, mumbled an apology, and ran to my room. I spent the night awake, tormented by guilt and confusion. The next day, during the return trip, we barely talked. The silence between us was loaded with tension and regret. Upon arriving at the office, we tacitly agreed to act as if nothing had happened. The following weeks were hell. Every time I saw Jack in the office, my heart raced. I tried to avoid him, but we worked together, and it was impossible not to cross paths. Tom noticed my change in mood and asked me several times if something was wrong, but I couldn't gather the courage to confess what had happened. A month after the incident, Jack asked me to stay after hours to discuss an important project. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. When everyone left and we were alone in the office, the tension was palpable. Jack started talking about the project, but soon the conversation drifted to what had happened between us. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me, that he had never felt anything like this for anyone. His words were like music to my ears, but at the same time, they filled me with anguish. I confessed that I also felt something for him, but that we couldn't act on these feelings. We both had commitments, responsibilities. He nodded, understanding, but before I could react, he kissed me again. This time, I couldn't resist. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and guilt. We started a clandestine affair, meeting in discreet hotels, inventing excuses for our partners. Each encounter was intense, full of desire and remorse in equal parts. My relationship with Tom was deteriorating. Although I tried to compensate for my infidelity by being more attentive and affectionate, the guilt was eating me up inside. He suspected something was wrong, but I denied everything, inventing excuses about work stress and fatigue. Meanwhile, at the office, Jack and I maintained a facade of professionalism. No one suspected our relationship, but the secret weighed on us. There were moments when our eyes met during meetings, and I felt like everyone could see through us. The situation became unsustainable when Jack's wife, Sarah, started frequenting the office more. She was a charming woman, and seeing her made me feel even worse. One day, Sarah invited me for coffee. I accepted, feeling it was the least I could do. During our conversation, Sarah confided in me that she felt Jack was distant, that she feared there was another woman. She looked me in the eyes, seeking a friend, a confidant. At that moment, I felt like the worst person in the world. I could barely maintain my composure for the rest of the conversation. That night, I cried myself to sleep. The guilt was consuming me. I decided I had to end the affair, no matter what I felt for Jack. The next day, I asked to see him after work. We met at our usual hotel. I told Jack we couldn't continue like this, that we were destroying our lives and those of the people we loved. He tried to convince me that what we had was special, that it was worth fighting for, but I knew we had to stop. I left the hotel room with a broken heart but determined to fix things with Tom. However, fate had other plans. When I got home, I found Tom sitting in the dark, with my phone in his hand. He had seen my messages with Jack. What followed was the worst night of my life. Tom yelled, cried, accused me of deceiving him for months. I couldn't deny it. I told him everything through tears, begging him to forgive me, but the damage was done. Tom packed his things and left, telling me he needed time to think. The following days were a whirlwind. At work, Jack found out that Tom knew everything and panicked. He feared his wife would find out, that he would lose his job, his reputation. He blamed me for not being more careful with the messages. Our relationship, which had once been passionate, became bitter and full of recriminations. I tried to focus on my work, but it was almost impossible. Every time I saw Jack, I felt a mixture of desire and resentment. The office environment became tense, and some colleagues began to notice that something was wrong between us. One afternoon, while working late, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice sounded broken. She told me she knew everything, that she had found evidence of Jack's affair. My world crumbled at that instant. Sarah asked me if I knew anything, if I could help her understand what had happened. At that moment, I had to make a decision. I could lie, protect Jack and myself, or I could tell the truth and face the consequences. I took a deep breath and told Sarah everything. I told her I was the other woman, that I was deeply sorry, and that I would understand if she hated me. To my surprise, Sarah didn't yell. Her voice, although full of pain, remained calm. She thanked me for my honesty and told me she needed time to process everything. I hung up the phone feeling both liberated and terrified of what was to come. The next day, Jack didn't come to work. I received a message from him saying that Sarah had kicked him out of the house, that everything was over. He asked me to meet him, to run away together, to start a new life. For a moment, I considered the idea. Wasn't this what I had secretly desired? An opportunity to be together without hiding. But then I thought of Tom, of Sarah, of all the people we had hurt. I realized that what Jack and I had wasn't love, but a destructive obsession. I replied that no, we had to face the consequences of our actions. My story isn't over yet, please consider subscribing to the channel, thank you, let's get back to the story. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. Jack resigned from the company, unable to face the approaching scandal. I considered doing the same, but decided to stay and face whatever came. Surprisingly, my colleagues were more understanding than I expected. Many offered support, although others looked at me with disapproval. Tom, after weeks of silence, contacted me. He wanted to talk, to close the chapter of our relationship in a more mature way. We met at a neutral cafe and had a painful but necessary conversation. He told me that although he couldn't completely forgive me, he understood that relationships are complicated and that people make mistakes. He wished me the best and said goodbye, leaving me with a mixture of relief and sadness. Sarah, on the other hand, surprised me even more. One day, she asked to meet me. I feared the worst, but when we met, she thanked me again for my honesty. She told me that although I had caused her immense pain, my confession had given her strength to face the problems in her marriage. She told me that she and Jack were in therapy, trying to rebuild their relationship. As I listened to Sarah, I realized how much damage a lie can cause and how much power the truth can have. Although I had lost a lot, I felt that I could finally begin to forgive myself. The months passed, and little by little, my life began to take a new direction. I focused on my work, on rebuilding my friendships, and on healing. I started therapy, facing my own demons and trying to understand why I had made the decisions I made. One day, almost a year after the start of this whole story, I received an email from Jack. He told me that he and Sarah had decided to give themselves a second chance, that they were working hard on their marriage. He thanked me for not running away with him that day, for making him see that what we had wasn't real. His words, though bittersweet, gave me a sense of closure. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that this experience, although painful, had taught me valuable lessons. I learned about the importance of honesty, not only with others but with myself. I learned that true love isn't built on lies and deception, but on trust and mutual respect. I also learned that the decisions we make have consequences that go beyond ourselves. Each action, each lie, each moment of weakness can have a domino effect on the lives of those around us. This realization made me more aware of my actions and more committed to living an authentic and ethical life. Over time, I started dating again. I was cautious, taking things slowly and always being honest about my past. I met someone, Michael, who accepted me with all my mistakes. Our relationship developed slowly, based on trust and open communication. At work, I gradually regained the respect of my colleagues. I focused on being the best version of myself, professionally and personally. I was even promoted, occupying the position that Jack had left vacant. It was an irony of fate, but I saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate my value and integrity. One day, while walking in the park with Michael, I saw Jack and Sarah in the distance. They were sitting on a bench, talking and laughing. For a moment, I felt a twinge of nostalgia, but I soon realized that I no longer felt anything for Jack. What I had mistaken for love had been just an illusion, a fantasy fueled by the emotion of the forbidden. Michael noticed my change of expression and asked if everything was okay. I told him about Jack and Sarah and everything that had happened. I had already talked about my past with him, but seeing them there brought everything to the surface again. Michael listened attentively, held my hand, and said he was proud of how I had handled everything and the person I had become. That night, as I reflected on the encounter in the park, I realized how much I had changed. I was no longer the same person who had let herself be carried away by a forbidden attraction. I had grown, matured, and learned from my mistakes. However, life has a curious way of testing our resolutions. A few months later, the company announced a restructuring. As part of the changes, a new department was created and, to my surprise, Jack was rehired to lead it. The news caused a stir in the office, and I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. The day Jack returned to the office was tense. We greeted each other cordially, maintaining a professional distance. In the presentation meeting, our eyes briefly met, and I could see in his a mixture of emotions, regret, nostalgia, and perhaps a glimpse of what we once felt. After the meeting, Jack asked to speak to me privately. I took a deep breath and said we could talk, but only about work matters. No private meetings, no personal conversations. Jack nodded, respecting my decision. The following months were an exercise in self-control and maturity. Working with Jack brought back some memories, but I no longer felt the attraction I once did. In its place was a mutual understanding, a respect born from having gone through the fire and survived. My relationship with Michael continued to flourish. His unconditional support and understanding helped me navigate this new situation. One night, while we were having dinner at home, Michael surprised me with a marriage proposal. Through tears of joy, I accepted. The news of my engagement spread quickly through the office. I received congratulations from everyone, including Jack. His congratulations were sincere, and I could see in his eyes that he too had found peace. As I planned my wedding, I couldn't help but reflect on how things had changed. Just 2 years ago, I was trapped in a web of lies and deception, believing I was in love with a man I couldn't have. Now, I was about to marry someone who loved me for who I was, with all my flaws and past mistakes. The day of my wedding arrived, and it was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. Surrounded by friends and family, I united with Michael in matrimony. During the reception, I noticed that Sarah was among the guests. I had hesitated to invite her, but in the end, I felt it was the right thing to do. She approached to congratulate me, and we shared a moment of mutual understanding. We had both grown through pain and found a path to happiness. When Michael and I left for our honeymoon, I felt truly at peace for the first time in a long time. I had learned that true love isn't an unbridled passion that leads you to betray your values, but a deep companionship based on trust, respect, and honesty. The years passed, and my life took a direction I never would have imagined. Michael and I had 2 children, and I found a balance between my career and my family that filled me with satisfaction. At work, I continued to advance, eventually becoming the director of the department. Jack and I maintained a cordial professional relationship over the years. Sometimes, during long strategy meetings, our eyes would meet, and I could see a flicker of recognition, a shared memory of what once was. But there was no longer longing or regret, just the certainty that we had both found our way. One day, years later, I received shocking news. Jack had suddenly passed away from a heart attack. The news shook me more than I expected. Although our relationship had been complicated, Jack had been a significant part of my life, a catalyst for change and growth. I attended the funeral with Michael by my side. Seeing Sarah and Jack's children, I felt a mixture of emotions, sadness for their loss, gratitude for the lessons learned, and a deep appreciation for the path my life had taken. After the funeral, Sarah sought me out. She hugged me and thanked me for coming. She told me that in his last years, Jack had often spoken about how our story had taught him the true value of love and fidelity. She told me that despite all the pain, she was grateful because this experience had ultimately strengthened their marriage. That night, as I lay beside Michael, I reflected on the journey that had been my life since the company party where it all began to this moment. I had experienced love, betrayal, guilt, redemption, and finally, peace. I realized that each decision, each mistake, each moment of weakness, and each act of courage had led me to where I was now. The affair with Jack, although painful and full of remorse, had been a crucial turning point in my life. It had taught me the value of honesty, the importance of integrity, and the true meaning of love. I looked at Michael, sleeping peacefully beside me, and felt a wave of love and gratitude. He had been my rock, my companion on this journey of self-discovery and growth. With him, I had learned that true love isn't a burning flame that consumes everything in its path, but a constant light that illuminates the way through dark moments. I thought about my children, how I wanted to be an example for them. I wanted them to understand that we all make mistakes, but what's important is to learn from them and strive to be better every day. As I fell asleep, I felt at peace with my past and excited about the future. I had learned that life isn't a straight line, but a winding path full of challenges and opportunities for growth. And although I couldn't change the decisions I had made in the past, I could use those experiences to shape a better future. The next morning, I woke up with a new determination. I decided it was time to share my story, not as a confession or a search for absolution, but as a lesson for others who might be struggling with difficult decisions or dangerous temptations. I began writing a book, narrating my experience honestly and without embellishment. I didn't paint myself as a victim or a heroine, but as a real person who made mistakes, learned from them, and found redemption. The writing process was cathartic. Reliving those moments wasn't easy, but with each word I wrote, I felt I was freeing myself a little more from the chains of the past. Michael supported me every step of the way, reading drafts and offering his perspective. When the book was finished, I hesitated to publish it. I feared the reactions, the judgment of others, the possible impact on my career and my family. But Michael reminded me why I had decided to write it in the first place, to help others and to finally close this chapter of my life. With my heart in my throat, I sent the manuscript to several publishers. To my surprise, I received positive responses. One publisher in particular was enthusiastic, saying that my story could resonate with many people who had faced similar moral dilemmas. The day my book was launched was surreal. Seeing my name on the cover, my story there for everyone to read, filled me with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. The reactions were varied, as I expected. Some criticized me, judging my past actions. Others praised me for my honesty and courage in sharing such a personal story. What I didn't expect was the avalanche of messages from people who identified with my experience. I received emails from men and women who had been through similar situations, thanking me for giving them a voice and showing them that there was hope after the mistake. One afternoon, while I was signing books in a small bookstore, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She told me that my book had helped her make the decision to end an extramarital relationship before it was too late. She hugged me and thanked me for saving her marriage. At that moment, I knew that sharing my story had been worth it. The success of the book led me to give talks at conferences and universities. I spoke about ethics in the workplace, about the importance of honesty in relationships, and about how to face the consequences of our actions. Each time I shared my story, I felt I was healing a little more. One day, I received an unexpected invitation. Sarah wanted to see me. We met at the same cafe where, years ago, we had that painful conversation. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Sarah thanked me for writing the book, for telling our story in a way that honored Jack's memory and could help others. She told me that the book had initiated important conversations in her family, especially with her now adult children. It had allowed them to see their father not as a villain or a saint, but as a complex human being who made mistakes but also learned from them. As we talked, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and betrayal that once separated us now united us in mutual understanding. Sarah told me about her life after Jack, how she had found strength in herself and how she was helping other women overcome infidelities. As we said goodbye, Sarah hugged me and said something I'll never forget: "Thank you for helping me forgive not only Jack and you, but also myself." That night, as I had dinner with Michael and our children, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. I looked at my family, the love of my life and the children we had raised together, and marveled at how far I had come. I reflected on the long journey I had traveled since that night at the company party. Each decision, each mistake, each moment of weakness and each act of courage had brought me to this point. I had learned that true love isn't a perfect fantasy, but a daily commitment to honesty, respect, and forgiveness. I realized that my story wasn't just about infidelity and redemption. It was a story about personal growth, about facing our mistakes and using those experiences to become better versions of ourselves. It was a story about the power of truth, even when it's painful, and about how that truth can liberate not only ourselves but also those around us. As my children laughed and Michael smiled at me from across the table, I felt a deep peace. I had gone through the fire and come out stronger, wiser, and more capable of truly loving. My journey hadn't been easy, but each step had led me to this moment of happiness and fulfillment. And so, looking to the future with hope and gratitude, I realized that my story of love, betrayal, and redemption wasn't the end, but the beginning of a life lived with authenticity, compassion, and true love. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a sense of completeness I had never experienced before. The weight of secrets and lies that had once burdened me was gone, replaced by the lightness of truth and self-acceptance. I thought about all the people who had been part of my journey: Jack, Sarah, Tom, and now Michael and our children. Each of them had played a crucial role in shaping the person I had become. I realized that life isn't about avoiding mistakes or pretending to be perfect. It's about embracing our flaws, learning from our experiences, and constantly striving to be better. My affair with Jack, as painful and destructive as it had been, had ultimately led me to a deeper understanding of myself and of what truly matters in life. In the years that followed, I continued to speak and write about my experiences. I received countless letters from people who had read my book or attended my talks, sharing their own stories of struggle and redemption. Some had found the courage to end destructive relationships, others had learned to forgive themselves or their partners. Each story reminded me of the ripple effect our actions can have, for better or worse. Michael and I grew stronger together, our love deepened by the honesty and trust we shared. We raised our children with the values we had learned through our experiences: the importance of integrity, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty of unconditional love. As I grew older, I looked back on my life with a sense of wonder. The young woman who had once been caught in a web of lies and passion seemed like a distant memory. Yet, I was grateful for her mistakes and her courage. Without her, I wouldn't be the person I had become. I often thought about Jack, wondering what he would think of the impact our story had had on so many lives. I hoped that wherever he was, he had found peace, just as I had. In the end, I realized that my journey was never really about the affair or even about redemption. It was about discovering the true meaning of love, not as a fleeting passion or a perfect ideal, but as a choice we make every day. A choice to be honest, to be kind, to forgive, and to grow together. And as I looked at Michael, at our children, and at the life we had built together, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along: a love that was real, enduring, and true.